Kindly mute your microphone when not speaking to avoid disruptive noise. To mute your microphone, select the microphone icon at the bottom left corner of the Zoom call. When the icon has a red slash through it, it is muted. During the open forum, please use the Q&A chat box function. Kindly type your questions briefly and clearly. Online participants are requested to virtually remain in the webinar until the end. Conference will be recorded for internal documentation. Participants are not allowed to record any part of the webinar. If you have any questions or inquiries, you may direct them to the technical assistance of the webinar via private chat. And lastly, please continue to observe proper decorum throughout the session. The organizers, PAX Asia, the Foundation for the National Interest, Australian Aid, Waypoints Project, FES Philippines, José Rizal University, and the Philippine Public Safety College strive to ensure a high level of security for your personal data. The organizers will comply with the Philippines Data Privacy Act, governing data that was gathered as part of the registration process during this event and the evaluation. Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, good morning to everyone. Magandang umaga. Good morning to all our participants joining us in today's hybrid event. Morning to everyone here at José Rizal University and to the 260 and counting online participants joining us via Zoom. Today's conference is titled Responding to the Evolving Security Dynamics in the South China Sea, Bolstering the Philippines' Maritime Security. This is a continuation of a webinar series that focuses on security and foreign policy in the Indo-Pacific. We all know that the geopolitical landscape of the region has been heavily shaped by great power competition of the United States and China, and is further compounded by the interests of external actors to uphold respect for international law and adherence to the principles of the rule-based order. In today's event, we will examine how the changing geopolitical dynamics can affect small states like the Philippines and assess how the Philippines can fortify its maritime security and governance amidst evolving threats. It's a pleasure to see all of you here after organizing 2 webinars. It is nice to finally conduct an in-person event and a chance to meet people face-to-face. My name is Aries Arugay. I'm professor and chairperson of the Department of Political Science at the University of the Philippines, Diliman, and I will be your host and moderator for today's program. Today's hybrid event is brought to you by PAX Asia, the Foundation for the National Interest, Australian Aid, Waypoints Project, the Friedrich Ebert Stiftung Philippines, José Rizal University, who is our host for today, and the Philippine Public Safety College. To officially start the session, may I invite retired Vice Admiral José Luis Alano, Chairman of the Board of Trustees of the Foundation of the National Interest, who will be delivering his welcome remarks online.
Your Excellencies, distinguished guests, our esteemed fellow citizens of our archaeological state, ladies and gentlemen. As an archaeological nation, we are faced with mounting, real, and pressing security challenges. From terrorism, competition for resources, the risk of conflict, or as we have just commemorated last week, the effects of superdive internationally known as China, the strongest typhoon to make landfall that caused a great amount of damage and more so the loss of thousands of lives, forcing us to adapt and make adjustments on how we can best mitigate, but more importantly, prevent and avoid such ill effects, as well as defend and secure the state from such threats. This further highlights the relevance of today's theme on defense and security issues. Resilient Maritime Archipelagic Nation morning to everyone. And on behalf of our co-host, the Foundation for National Interests, Amador Research Services, Waypoint Project, José Rizal University, Frederick Ebert Stiftung Philippines, and the British Embassy Manila. Welcome to this conference entitled Responding to the Evolving Security Dynamics in the South China Sea, Bolstering the Philippines' Maritime Security. The aim of the conference is to hone on a deeper understanding on current affairs and how the Philippines can navigate the current geopolitical environment and strengthen its maritime and security governance. While the Indo-Pacific is largely shaped by the great power competition, the Southeast Asian region, with the South China Sea in particular, is the stage for competition with multiple dimensions of contestation, from elements that are political, technological, economic, military, and even space. This is further compounded by the interests of external actors, such as Australia and Japan, as well as the European states, who stand to uphold and respect for international law and adherence to the principles of the rules-based order. With the interplay of great power competition, territorial disputes, competing interests, and various defense and security arrangements in the regions, such as those being forged with the visit of Prime Minister Kishida just recently, littoral states like the Philippines are caught in the middle of heightening tensions. The Philippines has borne the brunt of China's aggressions, with recent encounters involving military high-grade laser lights, dangerous maneuvers, water cannons, and floating barriers within the country's exclusive economic zone and territorial claims. Despite its firm stance in its upholding the 2016 arbitral award, the Philippines still needs to improve its approach to maritime governance to effectively uphold its national interests. It is therefore vital to understand how the changing geopolitical dynamics can affect small states like the Philippines, and how it can further fortify its maritime security and governance amidst the evolving threats. For today's conference, the organizers have done a fantastic job of having assembled a power pack of highly esteemed authorities and experts to dissect this current and crucial topic for us. To give the keynote address, we have the former Chief of Staff, Armed Forces of the Philippines, and now the Presidential Special Assistant for Maritime Affairs, the Honorable Secretary Andres Centino. For our panel discussants, we have Her Excellency Laure Beaufils, Ambassador of the United Kingdom to the Philippines, Her Excellency HKU, Ambassador of Australia to the Philippines, Dr. J. Batongbacal, Director of the University of the Philippines Institute for Maritime Affairs and Law of the Sea, General Emmanuel Bautista, another former Chief of Staff of the Armed Forces of the Philippines, and a trustee of the Foundation for National Interests. The event will be moderated by no less by Dr. Aries Arugay, Chairperson, University of the Philippines Department of Political Science. Maritime security issues occupies an important space in any conversation with respect to national security, and is of great interest to the nation as these issues have real bearing on not just the present, but also the future well-being of our people. It is hoped that by the end of this conference, you would be able to have some convergence of ideas that lead to actionable policy recommendation. Again, welcome, and we look forward to a vibrant, interactive, and worthwhile event. Mabuhay.
honored today for him to be able to give his keynote speech. May I please invite the Honorable Secretary Andres Centino, Special Assistant for Maritime Concerns from the Office of the President of the Republic of the Philippines.
Ladies and gentlemen, Excellencies, Ambassador of the United Kingdom to the Philippines, His Excellency Laure Beaufils, ma'am, Australian Ambassador to the Philippines, Her Excellency HAU, Indonesian Ambassador to the Philippines, His Excellency Agus Wijuju. May I greet also Mr. Mathias Kruse of the Embassy of Germany in Manila. Welcome to the Philippines, sir. The chairperson of the Foundation for National Interest, Vice Admiral Luis Alano, the president of the Philippine Public Safety College, Ferdinando Sevilla. I was informed also that we have students of the Masters in Public Safety Administration. Perhaps some of them, they're here, and some of them are joining online. The former Chief of Staff of the Armed Forces of the Philippines, General Emmanuel Bautista, sir. Distinguished guests, esteemed experts in the field of security and maritime affairs, students and faculty of José Rizal University, members of the VAdm, fellow government workers, a pleasant morning to you all. I am honored to join you today in this conference entitled The Evolving Security Dynamics in the South China Sea, Bolstering the Philippines' Maritime Security Through Partnerships and Reforms. Before anything else, allow me to express my appreciation to FACTS Asia Center, the Foundation for National Interest, Waypoints, and José Rizal University for organizing and initiating this endeavor of gathering all of us together this morning with the objective of enhancing collective awareness of what is currently happening in our maritime domain. And I am glad that we have speakers today in the person of Attorney J. Batongbacal, who is an acknowledged expert on maritime affairs. Of course, I mentioned earlier, the former Chief of Staff, General Emmanuel Bautista, a mentor, and who at one point was the Executive Director of the National Task Force in the West Philippine Sea. This gathering this morning is also timely as this underscores the urgency of protecting our maritime interests now rather than later, and securing its future amidst the evolving tensions among great powers. Further, this event also puts into focus the importance of nations to observe rules-based order in an international community that is anchored on mutual respect and adherence to international law. And I'm also glad that among the speakers this morning, our esteemed ambassadors representing our allied countries. My role as a keynote speaker is to set the tone for today's discourse and discussions. And I would not delve much on the issues, but rather I would stress the importance of this morning's event, which is awareness of the issues currently happening in that maritime area. I am in the belief that key to addressing the evolving maritime security dynamics that we are faced with today is knowledge and understanding of the issues involved in order for us to have informed perspectives that will guide us to come up with rational and doable solutions. President Ferdinand Marcos Jr., a few months ago during the AFP change of command ceremony and also my retirement from the military service, in his remarks, he called on the armed forces of the Philippines to continue working with the national government and the civilian stakeholders to form what he called an archipelagic consciousness among the Filipino people in a bid to champion the country's territorial integrity and sovereignty. The President was clear in his policy statement that knowledge and understanding of the Filipino citizenry and the vital issues of our archipelagic and maritime domain will be key factors in upholding our sovereignty. It was also in the same event that he designated me to be his presidential assistant to help him ensure that the government provides a more focused approach in addressing the concerns in our maritime domain, especially in the West Philippine Sea. With the renewed trust of our government to protect our national interests, the President has created an office. This is the Office on Maritime Concerns that will oversee that maritime policies of the government are continuously evolving from what has been started. Hence, my role as presidential assistant, among others, would give emphasis on promoting public awareness of issues in our maritime domain and in the West Philippine Sea to harness support for the government. Further, in upholding our national security, President Marcos Jr. has reaffirmed the sustainment of the whole-of-nation approach. This approach entails the best efforts not only of the entire bureaucracy of the government, but also of our citizenry and other sectors of society to perform our respective responsibilities for the country's interest. The President has also made the passage of the Maritime Zones Act and the Blue Economy Act as priority legislative bills for Congress. These bills, when passed, will be anchored on UNCLOS and international law and will further bolster the Philippines' initiatives in protecting and harnessing our maritime entitlements. Other than the best efforts of the government in protecting our national interests, however, what will be equally necessary is an enhanced collective support of the citizenry to achieve a unified national action to address the maritime challenges. A common view and understanding of the issues involved, again, without being repetitive, is important and paramount. Just last Friday, our vessels on a routine resupply to our troops in Ayungin Shoal remained steadfast, and despite the hurdles, they were able to complete their mission amidst the Chinese Coast Guard's harassment, blocking and dangerous maneuvers, and even the use of water cannons. This was exacerbated by the allegation that the Philippines' lawful and recognized right to conduct the mission infringes upon the territorial sovereignty of another. Well, we know that these are lies, insinuations, and propaganda thrown at us. This incident emphasizes anew that our nation and the public needs to be well-informed, coordinated, and unified in our understanding of the issues. Our frontline personnel from the Armed Forces of the Philippines and the Coast Guard are ever present and have shown professionalism in protecting our sovereign waters. I should know this. As a former Chief of Staff of the Philippines, I had the opportunity to visit our troops in the most remote islands there in the West Philippine Sea. However, the heroism of our soldiers will not be enough. What we need is public support, which is essential to ensure that we as one country are indeed capable to protect and guard our maritime waters. It is encouraging to know that the high level of support that most Filipinos accord to our exercise of sovereign rights in the West Philippine Sea. The Octa Research Survey result last July showed 65 to 70% of Filipinos call upon the further ascension of our rights in our maritime areas. A study in last year by Pulse Asia further identified that over half of Filipinos approve of the Philippines strengthening of security cooperation with our allies on the matters in the West Philippine Sea. But these are numbers that still can be improved with our advocacy. The theme of our conference today states that we bolster our maritime security through partnership. Hence, I hasten to add, by urging our partners to help in countering disinformation and false narratives of those who may be opposed to the efforts of the government protecting our national interests, by learning more and understanding clearly on the issues surrounding our maritime environment. I also take the opportunity to thank our allies and partners, the governments of the United Kingdom, Germany, and of Australia for the statements of support to our government after the collision incident that happened in Ayungin Shoal a month ago, and the recent incident just last week. They were among the first countries who expressed their support. Thank you. Lastly, I encourage every one of us to continue being informed citizens, knowledgeable of our national interests, and being agents of truth in promoting awareness within our respective spheres of influence, just like our national hero, José Rizal, whom this university is named after. He was socially aware of the issues prevailing during his time, and this was the basis of his actions. I am sure that the impacts of our individual efforts will continuously increase and grow over time, contributing to a collective whole capable of addressing the challenges we are faced. In closing, allow me once again to express appreciation to the organizers of this conference today for this noble event that would only contribute to the awareness of our citizenry on the issues we are facing. Activities like these are ways for us to be informed and educated in our perspectives and views. We definitely need this understanding in order to be united and resolute as a people to defend and protect what is rightfully ours. I'm looking forward to a fruitful discussion later this morning. And I say once again, good morning to all. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Secretary Centino. Thank you for the profound and enlightening remarks. Indeed, the South China Sea is currently a geopolitical hotspot in the Indo-Pacific region, with the interplay of great power competition, territorial disputes, and various defense and security arrangements in the region. Littoral states like the Philippines are caught in the middle of heightening tensions. This is indeed a very timely topic, and this is an opportunity for our participants to understand how vital the changing geopolitical dynamics affect small states like the Philippines, and how we can maneuver despite heightening tensions. Let me now introduce our esteemed speakers who will give their thoughts, views, and insights on great power competition, the role of middle powers in abating tensions, and the Philippines' marine security and governance. Before that, the organizers have asked me to relay the information that at present we have 200 participants in the auditorium right now, and we have 285 participants joining us online. May I also acknowledge that we all, apart from students from José Rizal University, we also have students from the College of St. Benilde and Ateneo de Naga University joining us online as well. For our moderated discussion, may I now introduce our esteemed speakers. The first is Her Excellency Ambassador Laure Beaufils. current Ambassador of the United Kingdom to the Republic of the Philippines and the Republic of Palau. Ambassador Beaufils was Deputy Director for the Middle East and North Africa of the Department of International Development and Deputy High Commissioner to Nigeria from 2017 to 2019. She was formerly the head of the UK Department of International Development in Rwanda, where she managed a $100 million portfolio program centered on economic development, governance, and the social sector. Prior to holding this, Ambassador Beaufils worked in various positions in the UK government. Ladies and gentlemen, Your Excellency, Ambassador Laure Beaufils, please join us on the stage. Our next speaker is Her Excellency Ambassador HKU. He's a senior career officer with the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, DFAT, in Australia. Immediately prior to this, Her Excellency has joined or is the Deputy Head of Mission and Minister at the Australian Embassy in Japan. She has also served in the missions in the Middle East and Africa Division of DFAT, Canberra. Prior joining DFAT, she also worked at the Department of Prime Minister and Cabinet, the Treasury for 14 years, and the Australian Taxation Office for 11 years. She was also posted to Japan as Minister Counselor for Economics. Ambassador Yu holds degrees in commerce from the University of Western Australia, a graduate diploma in economics with distinction from the Australian National University, and a Master of Taxation from the University of South Wales. Ladies and gentlemen, Your Excellencies, Ambassador Yu. Our next speaker is Professor Dr. J. Batongbacal, who's a lawyer with degrees in political science and law from the University of the Philippines, Diliman, a Master of Marine Management and Doctor of Science of Law from Dalhousie University in Canada. At present, he is professor at the University of the Philippines College of Law and serves as the director of the Institute of Maritime Affairs and Law of the Sea at the UP Law Center. Ladies and gentlemen, Your Excellencies, Professor J. Batongbacal. You might have seen him on TV, right? Last but not least is retired General Emmanuel Bautista, a trustee of the Foundation for the National Interest, and served as the 44th Chief of Staff of the Armed Forces of the Republic of the Philippines. He also served as Executive Director of the Cabinet Cluster on Security, Justice, and Peace at the Office of the President in Malacanang. And prior to this, he was Undersecretary at the Office of the President from 2014 to 2020. Ladies and gentlemen, retired General and former Secretary General Emmanuel Bautista. Thank you so much for joining us. And I'm sure everyone in the auditorium, as well as those joining us online, are excited to hear your thoughts on the issue of the day for our country and perhaps the entire region as well. Before we discuss, we have a lot in our agenda. May I please first ask our panelists to give their thoughts or responses to the remarks made by Secretary Centino. So just a few minutes, few thoughts on the on his keynote remarks for today. Maybe we can start.
Sure, very happy to. Thank you so much for organizing this excellent forum. And before I provide remarks on Secretary Centino's speech, can I just say how pleasing it is to see so many young people in the audience. And it actually gives me, yeah, you need round applause. Because you know why? The fact that all these young future leaders of the Philippines are engaged in this very important issue tells me the Philippines and this whole region is going to be just fine. So engage, learn, and as Secretary Centino said, and it goes straight to his speech, you need to keep yourself informed. You need to engage with what's happening out there because, you know, you being informed and making decisions about what your country needs to do will ensure that we all get to live in a world where we've got peace, stability, and prosperity for all of us. So I really commend you for turning up and taking interest in this. And it's really important that you take this on as your personal endeavor to provide leadership for your country. So thank you.
Thank you very much. It's really a pleasure to be here, but more importantly, an honor to be here with all of you interested in this topic of our national security. Now, we had a very good keynote address by Secretary Centino, and Ambassador HK here mentioned about awareness, and indeed, we need to be aware of what's happening. And also importantly, Secretary Centino mentioned about cohesiveness, national cohesiveness. He talked about the whole of nation approach. And we need to do that, to approach this issue as a people, as a nation. After all, national defense is a national responsibility, and that's all of us here, including you, students of JRU included. Now, as students, for instance, what can you do? Simply be aware of the Philippine narrative, to advance the Philippine narrative, not just nationally, but internationally. And we have friends here from the international community, as you have seen, fully supporting us, fully supporting the international's rules-based order. And our narrative is simply based on that, on international law, UNCLOS, on the arbitral award, and other international agreements. So let's continue to advance that Philippine narrative, not the Chinese narrative, but the Philippine narrative. We all have that responsibility as Filipinos, as a people, whole of nation approach, a cohesive approach, a deliberate approach in addressing this issue for the Filipino people, not just for us today, but for future Filipinos. So thank you for being here, for being interested in this issue, and let's all advance the Philippine narrative.
Sure. So magandang umaga, everyone. I'm absolutely delighted to be here. I thought those were excellent opening remarks. Thank you so much, Secretary Centino, and absolutely delighted to be with this amazing panel. I'd like to offer 4 points, if I may, as a reflection on what we've just heard, and perhaps on what you've also said, Aries, in your introductions. You just said, for example, Aries, that this issue is important for our country and our region as well. I am not from this region. I'm obviously from the UK. So I would like to offer first and foremost that this issue is not just important for the region, but for the world. So you all know the facts. 60% of global maritime trade goes through the South China Sea. This region is really important, obviously, from an economic and trade perspective. As the UK, we have 1.7 million Brits in the region. So it's obviously important from a consular perspective, And from a security perspective, what happens in this region matters from a principal perspective, but from a broader security perspective. So this really is a global issue. And it's right that we talk about this in global fora, not just in domestic fora. So I think that was my first point. My second point is I very much agree with the point made by Secretary Centino on knowledge and understanding. I would say that this is, again, not just a national issue, but a really important one beyond the Philippines and indeed the region, to raise awareness. So what is UNCLOS? What is the 2016 arbitral award and what does it say? And what is happening in the South China Sea? I think this is very important because we throw away some of these terms sometimes in a bit of a willy-nilly fashion without really understanding what is at stake. And I think we all have collectively in this room, in this virtual room and beyond, the obligation of educating ourselves on that. And the obligation to be fact-based and dispassionate about what's happening in the South China Sea. I think that's really, really important if we want to find durable solutions. So the point about knowledge understanding is right. And here I do want to salute the position that the government of the Philippines is taking in terms of strategic transparency in the South China Sea, which is very much about shedding a light on what is happening for the world to see. I'd like to raise a point about partnerships and alliances, which is very important, and it is obviously from a British perspective as well. Everyone knows about the Mutual Defense Treaty. That's very important, but so are broader alliances and partnerships. We, as the UK, obviously not as big as the US, Japan, other partners in this region, but we matter, as do all the other partners, because this is about how we all can contribute in different ways through our statements that we make around on a regular basis as necessary, but also through the different support that we can give to the Philippines, through the minilateralism, the alliances, the different contributions that we make. The UK, Australia, and the US contribute to AUKUS. That is one example. We work with Japan on GCAP. That's another example. That is a contribution to peace and stability in the region. So I think that's very important. My last point is perhaps more a reflection on what you've said, Aries, which is, you said verbatim, we are caught in the middle of great power rivalry. I think this would be something I'd love to discuss over the course of the morning. I think it's a little bit, there are risks to looking at the issue in the South China Sea from that perspective. A lot of the issues that we're talking about are about simple sovereignty, rule of law, territorial integrity, and it is about whether that is respected in the context of the Philippines. And if you look at it at great power rivalry, you're undermining, I think, Filipino agency and sovereignty and making it about two players where actually it's not just about those two players. It's a fundamental issue of rule of law, international law, rules-based international order, which we as the UK care passionately about. And that's what we want to be supporting the Philippines on. And I think that's perhaps a more helpful angle when we talk about these issues.
Thank you. Well, our three other panelists have said most of what needs to be said in reaction to General Centino's remarks, but probably I'll just highlight. One, of course, it has been pointed out that there is a need for national unity with respect to the perspectives on our issues with respect to concerning the West Philippine Sea, because it really is a matter of not just national security, but national future, really. The Philippines as an archipelago relies a lot more than what most people realize, on its maritime components. It's so mention of the Maritime Zone Act and the Blue Economy bill. These are just the latest manifestations of that the realization that we really need to put attention to the maritime components of our archipelago. Second is at the point on awareness and information about these issues. Again, that is likewise very important, because what we are seeing now is that, at least with respect to the West Philippine Sea, the Philippines and China, the battleground is shifting as much to the information realm as the sea itself. And I guess on this point, this is probably what I can say a little bit more. it was mentioned that there is a need for us to be able to counter the disinformation and the false narratives that are being fomented and distributed because of these issues. And this, I think, is something that really we need to underscore, and it's one reason why we are undertaking these activities. Countering disinformation is very difficult when, in the first place, what is needed is discernment, the ability to tell which piece of information that you come across is true or false. But let me just start probably with just saying that to be able to counter disinformation, everyone should realize that in order to be on the right path or the right perspective, we need to walk away from the language of fear and intimidation, which often is what underlies the disinformation and misinformation that's being fomented by the subalterns of those who want to undermine our rights. They always try to make us choose, no, in a way, between living in fear or living with freedom. We need to be able to ensure that our perspectives are informed and use the language of rights and equality, because this is what is really consistent with what we often refer to as the rules-based international order, but actually it refers to something deeper, an ideal world where nations as well as their peoples basically exist on the basis of rights and regard each other with as equals, rather than a situation where there is some kind of hierarchy where somebody has to be higher than the other, where some nation's interest must preempt all those of others. When it comes especially to these issues of the geopolitical competition and the role that the Philippines plays as one of the smaller nations, we need to be able to emphasize that the language that we use, the language and the perspectives that we advocate must be based on the language of community, meaning being part of a greater whole, a peaceful community that lives under the rule of law, that regards all nations as equal and all peoples as entitled to the same status and rights as every other people. And we need to shy away from or reject the language of essentially singularity, as if each of our nations, each of our peoples must fight against all others in a kind of Hobbesian state of nature. We need to be able to emphasize that what we have been working for all these years is to create a community that is based on mutually beneficial cooperation, one that is consciously negotiated and agreed upon and accepted by all states, and not a form of cooperation which is based on subjugation and submission. So those are probably some ideas that we could start off with to be able to distinguish between what is disinformation and false narratives and what is true and what will really defend the rights of the Filipino people. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jim. I have a lot to say about disinformation myself, doing research on that topic at the moment. But I want to pick up what Ambassador Laure mentioned earlier, that the part of the reality, and some people, it was great that you mentioned that it's also important to see issues like the South China Sea beyond simply as a theater of great power rivalry. But I want to pick still on that issue. And I totally agree. But at the same time, every international forum, every analysis, it comes down to the South China Sea being, in fact, caught not a venue for this great power rivalry that is complex, contentious, and countries in Southeast Asia being caught in the middle. So I still want to get your thoughts on how does this increasingly hot rivalry, some have already called it unhealthy competition between great powers, impact the South China Sea, and what can Southeast Asian countries do to protect their maritime interests? It would be great to simply just wish away the great power rivalry, but it is a glaring reality that stares all of us in the face. So maybe can I ask Ambassador Yu and then maybe General Bautista?
Thank you. From Australia's perspective, we too agree with Ambassador's description that we should not be referring to this as a mere great power rivalry. This is not a theatre for competition whereby all of us in this room and countries like Australia are standing there watching passively as our future is determined on our behalf. We're not going to let that happen, right? We all our countries have the right to actually make decisions in the interest of our countries. So the answer to your question is, what we need to create is strategic balance, strategic equilibrium in our region. And the way we can actually create that is by actively exercising our rights, actively making sovereign decisions, and changing the narrative. You know, to be honest, all Filipinos should get really offended if anybody in the world says, oh, you're being squeezed between China and the US, poor you. Why would I get offended if I was a Filipino? Because I would say, hold on, that assumes that we don't know how to think for ourselves. That assumes that we don't know what's in our best interest. If we decide to side with the US on certain issues, it's because it's in our interest. We made a conscious decision that it's in the interest of the Philippines. If we've decided to work cooperatively with China on other issues, that's because it's in our interest. We made that conscious decision. So please don't let anybody tell you that you're being squeezed between the US and China, because that actually is quite offensive, making an assumption that you don't know what is in your best interest. So that's how I would address that issue. And I think we all have a role to play. And this is why Australia is working so closely with the Philippines to ensure we can protect the kind of region that we want to live in.
Thanks, Ambassador. Excellent.
I can, well, I agree with Ambassador HK. It's, while there is a US-China rivalry, we should view it in the context of the three-way relationship, US, China, but the Philippines. And how do we situate ourselves in that competition, in that relationship? That is a given, US-China rival geopolitical competition, but we must understand, more importantly, our relationship with China. Our relationship is characterized by a territorial dispute. In fact, it's more than a territorial dispute. It's violation of our sovereignty and sovereign rights. So I don't care about that competition. What I'm concerned about is the violation of our sovereignty and sovereign rights, regardless whether there is competition out there. My concern is that. Now, our relationship with the United States. The US is our treaty ally, and certainly we can leverage upon that to dealing with our issue with China. Not just the United States, but we have other friends and allies we have here present with us, demonstrating their support for the Philippines. So whilst others would advocate a middle ground approach, staying between, in reality, sometimes the balance is not necessarily in the middle, in the center. Some advocates a balancing approach. Sometimes the balance is not in the middle. And in this three-way relationship, you will see that it is skewed towards our relationship with the US in order to advance our national interests, in order to assert our sovereignty and sovereign rights, to deter any aggressive action. Note, the operative word is deter, to prevent any aggression by making it more costly to pursue any aggressive action against the Philippines. So that's my view on this geopolitical competition.
Thank you, General Bautista. Any other follow-up thoughts on this, Ambassador?
Just very, very quickly, I agree with what's been said. I think you know where I stand on this, namely that you start with the Philippines, what's right with the Philippines. The lens of great power rivalry is not helpful, I think, for the Philippines. But I do want to say one more thing, because you asked not just about the Philippines, but other Southeast Asian countries. I think we have to be realistic. The world is a very contested place now. We are Prime Minister Kishida, when he addressed Congress recently, was talking about being at a crossroad. So I would say all countries need to also think about what kind of world we want, right? The rules-based international system. We bandy that word all the time. What does it mean? It means, what kind of world do you envisage for yourself? What are the rules that we live by? And I think all countries need to think about a national interest, but also where do we want to be in 10, 20 years' time? Balancing short-term risk with long-term risk is incredibly important. And I would say, thinking through that lens is perhaps more helpful than through the great power rivalry lens.
Yeah, and I would just like to add, no, I agree completely. The issue of the agency of each and every smaller nation, the Philippines, as well as other Southeast Asian countries, is really something that is noticeable here, where China and people who favor China's views, etc., always take that perspective that the Southeast Asian countries are just mere pawns, mere puppets of the other side. And that kind of narrative is even consciously or perhaps unconsciously being echoed by so-called two-bit experts, I guess, who try to cast everything as being, this is about geopolitical game that only the big boys play. Just recently, there was an analysis that came out in the news that was featured by some news outlets saying that the recent incident, for example, in Ayungin Shoal, was merely China's action against the United States, as if the Philippines were not present. That kind of analysis springs from this idea again that smaller nations like us have no role to play in geopolitical competition. And I think that's absolutely wrong. It only falls into the trap of laid by the other side, by China, to force us to give up our autonomy, to give up our rights and entitlements, as if we have to depend now on what these other nations give us. And so that's I think that's fundamentally wrong. And one way, again, for us to be able to identify misinformation and disinformation, even from people who claim to be experts. Thank you.
Thank you. I see a lot of students, so I can't help it. This is a teaching moment again. My next question has something to do with a concept in international relations we call the security dilemma. We notice that Southeast Asian countries are developing their defense and security apparatuses, the US reaching out to its allies in the region to do the same. What are your thoughts on the enhancement of Southeast Asian countries' defense and security and their relationship with powers like the US? Will this provoke China even more? Right? So will the attempt to increase the security of smaller states provoke further militarization, securitization in the region, and fan the flames of geopolitical competition in the region? Ambassador.
Thank you. I think you'll find we have answers that are not too dissimilar to the previous question. So yes, you raise an important point, the risk of increased militarization in the region and what comes with that risk. I'll come back to short-term versus long-term risks. It is true that with increased militarization, there are risks, for example, of an increased risk of an accident in the South China Sea. That is true, but equally, what are the long-term risks of doing nothing, right? So increased militarization is about deterrence. It is not about provoking war. It is actually trying to increase stability. That's, I think, what all of us are committed to do here. We're all acutely aware of the importance of peace and stability in this region and the cost to all of us in this region and beyond, should that not be respected. So that's really quite important. But I want to come back to provoking China. The Philippines is minding its own business. And if minding its own business in its own EEZ and is provoking China, you can't put that on the Philippines, if you see what I mean. And I think this is a really important point, because there's a danger in your question that we come back to the Philippines and say, well, be careful or don't assert your sovereignty, because if you do, then that might ignite the ire of Big Brother. All countries need to be able to self-defend and need to be able to assert their sovereignty. That is the basic of the UN Charter. Once you stop being able to do that for fear of what someone else will do, A, that other person wins, in effect, and B, the whole thing falls apart, right? So the scaffolding that holds up our international community falls apart. So I think we have to be cautious of the risks. We have to find ways to continue dialogue. We have to be able to have measures to de-escalate, but we should not use the words provoke China, because that is actually playing to the strength of a country that may not always be, well, you know what I'm saying. And the last thing to say is, the Philippines has attempted previously not to militarize, and it didn't work. So there's also a simple point of, right, that hasn't worked. We have no other option at this point but to assert our sovereignty through increased deterrence.
Yeah. Well, in the first place, military modernization within Southeast Asia has been taking place over the last 2 decades already. So these are just continuations of pre-existing trends. So that's why it's no reason to be provoked, quote unquote. Second, I think that countries like the Philippines, in exercise of their right to self-defense, which is inherent in all nations, also have the right to respond appropriately to what they perceive to be threats. And so the military modernization that has been going on, especially in the last few decades, has actually been long in coming for the Philippines. If anything, what we've learned is that non-modernization only provokes actions against us. That is what really attracts more adventurous moves on other parties, competitors, shall we say, over certain interests. If we do not modernize, if we do not beef up our own capabilities to keep up with the times, that is what leads them to take actions against us. So that is what's more provocative, quote unquote, than not doing anything. Thank you.
So I guess if I was to sum up what my wonderful panelists have already said, Australia often like to describe this as combination of diplomacy and deterrence. These actually complement each other. And every country has the right to engage and cooperate where they can with all the actors in your region. But you also have to be mindful and have strong enough military capability that backs that for deterrence effect. Because if you do not have that, then, as Jay said, aggressive actors can take advantage of the situation. So ensuring that you've got the right combination of capabilities and approach that confuses the calculus of a potential aggressor in your region is absolutely essential. So military capability itself does not mean you're provoking. It actually is a form of deterrent.
The last words on this question is from someone who actually led the Philippine military at one point, General Bautista.
Thank you. I'd like to focus on the modernization of ASEAN countries, specifically the Philippines. For us, for instance, our military modernization. We're part of that, increased defense spending like many other countries. But note that we're just simply playing catch up. We have really underinvested in defense for a long period of time. It's only now that we can really afford to acquire capabilities. And it's now that we feel the need to acquire more modern capabilities. So it's simply catch up. Other ASEAN countries, you know what is important is the intent. Some countries, they have a robust military capability, but you have to understand the intent. For instance, Singapore's military capability is really top-notch. But do we feel threatened with that? No, Singapore has, I doubt if it has any intent for any aggressive actions against anybody, comparing that to the military modernization of China because of its tendency to leverage upon that capability to bully others. But let me talk about that bullying. Earlier, the ambassador mentioned about deterrence. Let me elaborate on that. In layman's term, what really is that? If the bully sees that he can bully you and you don't have the ability or the will to fight back, he will keep on bullying you. So we need to develop that modicum of capability so that the bully will somehow hesitate if he sees that you can hurt him, not necessarily defeat him. It is impossible for countries like us, even if we spend for modernization, to defeat a big bully like China. No way. Ours is simply to inflict pain so that at least they will feel the pain that if you do something to us, you will get hurt also. And I'm willing to fight back. So, in fact, we need to demonstrate that national will that we are going to fight back. We are replete with history on that. We took on Spain with bolos and sharpened bamboo stakes against their cannons and rifles. But we stood up to that. That is the Filipino culture. That is the Filipino will to fight. We simply have to demonstrate that we are going to stand by our interests, our sovereignty and sovereign rights. Is that provocative? I mean, so we're not provoking. It's the bully who's provoking.
Yeah. Well, it's in our national anthem. Di ka pasisiil. Di po ba? Okay. The next topic of our conversation has something to do with the role of middle powers, right? Middle powers such as Australia, Japan, the UK, the European Union have turned their attention to the region. Oftentimes, their support have been translated to the creation of bilateral agreements, minilaterals, defense cooperation with like-minded states. Even the current government uses that term, cooperation with like-minded states. How do you think China will react to this? Will the involvement of middle powers reduce or increase tensions in the region? How can states in Southeast Asia leverage the involvement of middle powers in improving their maritime security in the region? So maybe start from the middle power representatives themselves, perhaps.
The representative of the middle power countries, Australia. I wanted to start with this proposition that you have middle power external players, because as Laure said, we are not external players. We are in it with you. We share, especially Australia, we share a region with the Philippines. So therefore we share a future together. So we are not an external player. at all. So that's the first thing. The concept of middle power, I would also like to propose that the Philippines need to start projecting itself as a middle power too. Nothing is actually holding you back in starting to see yourself in that category. It's really up to you. Now, having said that, coming back to the actual main crux of the question, how is the involvement of the middle power corporation in this region helping or not helping? All our cooperation is not targeted at a particular country. Coming back to our national interest, we are cooperating, we are working together because actually it's in our shared interest to do so. It's about all of us working together to, as Laure said, build and protect a rules-based order that is so important to all of us. This is why Australia, as the so-called middle power who lives in the region, work with the Philippines and with our partners in a number of ways. We unilaterally try and be a really good corporate citizen ourselves. And in fact, did you know, Australia also had a territorial dispute with our neighbor, Timor-Leste. Did you know that? Right? So just like the Philippines did, we also took it to International Court of Justice. The court ruled against Australia. We fully respected that decision, and we are now helping Timor-Leste to make the most of the territory that they actually basically won over, right? That's what good countries do. So that's how we show it unilaterally. Bilaterally with the Philippines, our engagement with you, especially in maritime space, as your threat has moved from internal threat to external, is enormous. And in fact, if I was to list them all, I would have to take up the rest of the seminar. So I won't do just that. But needless to say, it is through defense and security cooperation with AFP and PCG. It is through helping you understand the law of the sea so that we know how to apply the law. It is through providing you with hardware and training that goes with that. And it is through even looking at environmental law in maritime space, because rules-based order doesn't just stop with military and security. It actually surrounds all of our actions and our behavior. And on top of that, we have Australian commercial companies bringing to the Philippines really important sovereign capabilities for you, like Austal, which is an Australian shipping company that's been here for years with a state-of-the-art shipyard in Cebu. So we are ready to help you work on all those aspects. And thirdly, through minilateral and multilateral space, of course, Australia is an active participant in that, and we are working more and more with the Philippines to ensure we make the most of rules-making process that produces the rules and guidelines that protect our national interest. And in that, Australia has actively worked through even laterals such as the Quad and AUKUS and ASEAN Plus to ensure all these elements are contributing positively to protecting the rules-based order in this region in a positive way. It is possible to create positive agendas. It doesn't always have to be about conflict. It can actually be about countries with values that we share coming together with a very positive agenda and for positive outcomes for all.
Thank you. So I absolutely believe that middle powers, as you call them, have a role to play, whether they be middle powers or smaller countries. I think all countries that want to lean in and support the rules-based international system and like-minded partners have a role to play. And we all can do this in very different ways. Capability development on rule of law, on environmental issues, environmental programming, environmental governance, that's incredibly important. Through more hard-edged defense, or just for those countries that don't have the resources, through statements of principle. Every country has something different to contribute. But collectively, I think we are greater than the sum of our parts because we demonstrate that the Philippines is not alone. And I think what's quite encouraging is actually the number of countries that is standing up and speaking out when there are acts that are concerning in the South China Sea. That number is increasing. We've seen it time and again, and I think that's very, very positive as a strong statement to the international community that the Philippines does not stand alone. So yes, big programmatic responsibility, big defense responsibility, or rather opportunities, but also very much in terms of how we come together and make a strong statement. I do also, as I mentioned before, fundamentally believe in the importance of multilateralism and different fora, and also taking some of these issues to the UN and elsewhere where we can speak about these issues in multilateral fora and bring them to the world's attention. I do want to come back to the beginning of your question. How will China react? So I can't speak on behalf of China, and so I won't try to, but I wonder again if that's the right question, because A, we don't know, and it would be very difficult for us to second guess. But B, when we are doing the right thing, we should not constrain ourselves for fear of how China might react to actions that are in support of our values. And we should stand confident about our values when it is about international law and the UN Charter and UNCLOS that we've all signed up to.
Thank you. Earlier, I commented we're a small power, but Ambassador HK corrected me. We're not a small power, we are a middle power. Well, at least we aspire, at the very least, we aspire to be a middle power. And I'm very confident with all of you here that we will not achieve that. But to me, it doesn't really matter whether you are a small country, a middle power, or a great power. We are all equal. In the community of nations, we all have same rights. We all have a voice in the international community. And for us, Filipinos, we have the ability to, in fact, punch above our weight. You have seen Senator boxer Manny Pacquiao punch in several weight classes. And that's the character of the Filipino. We have the ability to do that. It really doesn't matter whether we are small, big, we can take on a bigger bully with only our will to fight. So that's how I view middle power, small power, great power. Doesn't really matter.
Thank you. Thank you, Aries. Yes, on this point, yes, I agree. No? Perhaps the question really should be more focused on what middle powers can contribute really to the ongoing geopolitical developments. On that particular issue, I think it's actually very positive. We'll notice, for me, I think we've already seen, we've been given a preview of how China reacts to middle powers sort of activating or becoming more active within the region. We've seen some of the reactions with respect to Japan and the Philippines, for example, with the recent visit of PM Kishida and the kinds of statements that China's churning out in its official mouthpieces. No? And you can see there that their reaction is really to disregard middle powers and simply assume that they are again puppets of another great competitor, which is a kind of strategic blindness as far as I'm concerned. They do not see that that these are actually very significant movements, and I think that's where their strength lies. Ultimately, I think that the engagement of middle powers will help to reduce tensions rather than increase them, because by getting a broader set of actors and showing that they really have autonomy and they really have their own interests at stake, they're able to add to the deterrence. No? They're able to collectively deter China from being more adventurous again in its actions. So that's why we are on the right track in trying to diversify our partnerships and security in security, to all of these other powers, whether they're middle, small, or great. As long as we diversify, then that increases our ability to deter collectively this problem. That also goes to the point of the Philippines as a middle power. When we say power, usually it's very a classical perspective. You start counting soldiers and aircraft, etc., or start counting economic numbers. But there's also the power that's a kind of that should be considered, and that's leverage, really. And that's where countries like us can punch above our weight, by leveraging some innate advantages that we have that we can offer to other countries to work when we work together. So one thing that comes up immediately for me is our location within Southeast Asia. Our strategic location really is something that allows us to create leverage, and that's why we work with other powers to try to leverage this against the aggressive actions of our neighbor. Thank you.
Thank you, Jay. I know that you might want to ask questions, but we still have two more things to do in our group discussion. But I just want to update everyone. We have around 630 people in attendance at the moment. There are 300 of you right now in the auditorium and 330 joining us online. I also want to acknowledge that we have students from the security sector joining us, particularly under the National Police College of the Philippine Public Safety College as well, but joining us online as well as here. But I also want to acknowledge our guests from other embassies and missions, particularly our dear friends from the Embassy of Germany is here. We'll deliver the closing remarks earlier. And of course, Ambassador Agus Wijojo, Ambassador of the Republic of Indonesia, is also joining us here. Thank you, sir. The second to the last question, before we open up to everyone, I'll ask Jay and General Bautista to lead the discussion on this. Ambassador Laure mentioned this policy of strategic transparency. I think it's the first time I'm hearing the term. Oftentimes it's just this new policy of the government. This has caused the Philippines to experience the brunt of China's aggression. We saw this in the resupply missions. We've heard the remarks, and we've received the threats, right? Regardless to say. China has also published an updated version of its maritime claims, from a 9-dash line to a 10-dash line that encompasses our exclusive economic zone, as well as the EEZs of other littoral states. Focusing on protecting the interests of the Philippines in the South China Sea, particularly the West Philippine Sea, how can the Philippines benefit from the interest and attention that the country is receiving right now? And what should the Philippines consider in forming countermeasures against China's, let's call a spade, China's assaults? So maybe Jay and then General Bautista, and then I invite our dear ambassadors to also chip in.
Well, I think that we already started talking about this earlier, no? Benefiting from the interest engagement of external actors. It's really, again, primarily because our strategic location, but it's also because in a way we are ground zero for any potential change in the global order at this point, no? To allow China to be able to have its way in the South China Sea, essentially take away the West Philippine Sea from us, would undermine a delicate balance of the usage of the oceans, no? And it is based on that balance that the world has actually thrived since the end of the Second World War. It's because of the freedom of the seas, no, the freedom of and the access of all nations to the waterways of the world that we have been able to create an international economy that is dependent on maritime trade. Many of the goods, the services that we have now are available because of that. And this is all supported by this international system, UNCLOS and all the international laws that we have. To allow China to carve out an exception for itself, no, in this undermines that system and therefore undermines the kind of world that we will have in the future. And it will be a slide backwards, essentially. And I think that other nations are very much aware of this, perhaps even more than we are. And that's why many countries have been coming to the Philippines in the past few months even to express not only support, but to also provide concrete assistance. And that came because of that very visible change in our policy and posture with respect to the West Philippine Sea. That is an example, a very clear example of this. So I think that that is how we should continue doing it, not to show that that by standing up for international law, standing up for rights and entitlements of sovereign nations, we are also standing up for the rest of the world, essentially. And the rest of the world will then come to us and help us face this very big challenge. Countermeasures, of course, this is something that we really should consider at this point and at an appropriate time. One problem that I see is that the Philippines historically has been sort of reluctant, or perhaps I dare say even afraid to make use of this option vis-a-vis other states that they think are more powerful. But I think that we should be actively considering them now, especially as we see more aggressive actions against us at sea. And when we do this, we should have the assurance as well that other nations will support whatever countermeasures we have or we decide upon. And that's why it's important for us to do right now, to be doing what we're doing right now, which is to create this broad, it's like a coalition of like-minded states, yes. But it's basically to secure support and to be able to make sure that we are acting consistently with the international community and their ideas and their interests when we take these actions. Thank you.
General Bautista.
I would say that we've been in the limelight for a long time already. We've been in the radar of the international community for a while already. Perhaps what is not consistent is our national positioning on this. Standing up against China and then succumbing to Chinese aggressive action and now again standing up to China. What we need to do is to be consistent on this. We need to unite as a people and demonstrate our resolve to defend our sovereignty and sovereign rights. That is what is lacking. While we have international attention, we should be able to demonstrate that as a people, that we are one as a nation and that we are willing to stand up to our rights, to our sovereign rights, to our sovereignty, and only then can we get the support of the international community. But we need to be consistent in this messaging. So now is really an opportunity for us to ramp up that, to demonstrate national cohesiveness, advancing the Philippine narrative so that we may get the support of the international community. Attention is irrelevant unless we are able to achieve that. Thank you.
Thank you, General Bautista. Additional comments?
If I could just very quickly add, the strategy of transparency is definitely very effective. And in fact, because of transparency, people actually know what's going on. I suspect that always went on, but people didn't really know that it was happening. Secondly, it's actually engaged international community more. So now you have greater number of countries and coming up in support of the Philippines. And thirdly, there are other ASEAN countries, right, that has been affected by the so-called 9-line, 10-line. What the Philippines and all of us, in fact, it's not just the responsibility of the Philippines, what the like-mindeds in Philippines can do more of is to really engage other ASEAN countries and seek their support in a public way for the rules-based order, because it affects all the ASEAN nations that have enormous agency in what's happening in the South China Sea. And if we can perhaps work together to encourage our ASEAN colleagues to be a bit more vocal about not which side they take, which side they're taking, because that's not what this debate is about. That's not what this is about. It's more about standing up for the rules-based order that is absolutely in their national interest, publicly.
Thank you. So I'd like to make 3 points. The first is that I think the Philippines is doing the right thing. I think it's developed a really thoughtful, considered effective strategy, right? So the 3 pillars as I envisage them are, first, this strategic transparency, shining a light on what's happening, inviting journalists on Coast Guard ships or on planes to see for themselves. Second, as we've discussed, building capability for deterrence. And third, diversifying partnerships. I think that's an excellent strategy. There's a 4th pillar, which the government is talking about now as well, which is on future-proofing the economy and on thinking hard about economic security. That 4th pillar is important because it links to the point that General Bautista, you were talking about in terms of consistency. The Philippines has to be consistent should there be some economic challenges along the way and not be moved by that. So I think that's important. And then a last reflection. We were talking about what does it mean to be a middle power? Is it the number of men and women in the armed forces? Is it influence? Is it geostrategic positioning? I think it's also about having that credibility in international fora that you get through consistent principled positions, right? So what the Philippines is saying here in the South China Sea, it is saying in Russia, Ukraine, it is saying in the Middle East. And I think the way it has engaged in international fora across international conflicts is really powerful, because it is taking that line on sovereignty, on the right of a state to self-defense, on territorial integrity, and used its own example, but been true to that in the way it's engaged internationally. And I think that's also what makes for a credible, confident, powerful state that has influence internationally.
Thank you, Ambassador. Our final question before we invite our participants here and online to field their questions has something to do with the 2016 arbitral award, right? That the Philippines won when it filed this case in the Permanent Court of Arbitration. How can the Philippines further the arbitral award that many believe is now part of international law? How could legislation such as the Maritime Zones Bill, currently pending in Congress, benefit the ability of the Philippines to somehow implement and continue to adhere rules-based order on the basis of maritime law? Perhaps we'll ask the maritime law specialist first. Jay?
Thank you, Aries. It's actually the answer is the same that we gave to Congress and when you had the hearings. No? Enactment of the Maritime Zone Law and other laws that actually implement Philippine rights and entitlements within its maritime zones is exactly the way to implement the arbitral award. No? So people who say that there is no way to enforce this award don't know what they're talking about, because the award essentially directs or lays down the law that who's right and who's wrong in implementing their international rights and obligations. And so by enacting this maritime zone law, which implements UNCLOS, which implements our rights and entitlements in the maritime zones, this is actually implementation of the award. And therefore, by doing it, we are showing that we are standing by international law. And even if China continues to oppose us, even if they try to undermine our implementation of this award, all that does is to further emphasize and underscore that what it is doing is illegal and unlawful, whether on the basis of our national law or in international law. So that's why it's important for us to do this. We need to enact this legislation and policies that support it. Probably the other thing that we can do is that by having this legal basis, no, the enactment of the Maritime Zone Law and other laws, we will also have now the option, opening up the option of being able to act against the countries that continue to refuse to comply with UNCLOS or to abuse their rights under it. And that's very important as well, because those actions, countermeasures that are mentioned here, or any other actions due to that abuse would still be consistent with international law. So that's why we need to push through with this action. Thank you.
Thank you, Jay. Any other thoughts?
If I could just add, absolutely, Maritime Zone Bill for you is really important, because it's actually being implemented in a way that is consistent with UNCLOS and the arbitral award. So whatever you can do unilaterally to show the international community that you're creating even unilaterally laws that are consistent with international law is important. And this is why Australian government have been helping you to draft Maritime Zone Bill and share our experiences with you about how we've actually introduced and implemented our own Maritime Act. And can I just also say, big congratulations, because your legislators have been so open for consultation, because the important thing about introducing unilateral law is that you do not inadvertently create consequences that you didn't even think of, and it is actually against the norm, the international norm. To that extent, your legislators have been so open, and they've consulted us openly about the aspects of it, and where we had constructive feedback, took it on board very, very in a wholesome way. So I think that's definitely the way to go, and whatever you can to reflect international law in your own legislative structure. I think that's the way you can highlight the importance of 2016 award.
Thank you, Ambassador. Any other thoughts on this arbitral award? How can we further implement it, as well as both at the national and international?
Winning that decision from the arbitral court is the easier part. We were able to affirm our rights in the West Philippine Sea, but the more challenging part now is asserting those rights. And that is something we need to work on. We cannot just demand compliance. We need to assert our rights. And there are many ways of doing that. Peaceful way of doing that. For instance, fishermen fishing in our exclusive economic zone is a way of asserting their rights. Conducting research in the West Philippine Sea is asserting our rights. Exploration activities, exploitation of our resources in the West Philippine Sea. And we can only achieve that, asserting our rights if we get together as a people, that we express, demonstrate our resolve to do that and not be bullied. Notwithstanding a water cannon or any other laser pointing or whoever rides in a Yungin shoal, we will continue to assert that right. Because it is our right, and that was affirmed by the arbitral court, by UNCLOS, by the international community. And we are not alone in this because we have friends in the international community that will help us assert those rights if we, as a people, lead that. I mean, if we really do that, and the international community sees that, there's no way they will not help us. There's no way that China will succumb to that. I mean, that is our responsibility as a people, as I said earlier, not just for us now, but for future Filipinos. We got our title. We need to preserve that title. It's not something that you will throw into the wastebasket.
Thank you. I'd like to make just 2 points. The first on the arbitral award, I think that for me, the first step is to continue to educate people about it. So the arbitral award, as we know it, is final and it's legally binding on both parties. But does everyone know what it says on environmental issues? Because actually it's not just about, sovereignty and lines, it's about also environmental issues. And it clearly condemns China for some of its actions in environmental terms in parts of the South China Sea. I think that's important. My second point is on environmental issues. As was alluded to, this discussion is important from a security perspective. It's important from a rule of law sovereignty perspective. It's important from a livelihoods perspective, right? So this is about fish. This is about nutrition, about protein, about livelihoods, about people's lives. I think we can address a lot of these really, really tricky issues through the lens of environmental in a way that's effective. Thinking about ocean governance is really important. Tomorrow, the DFA, with support from some of us, is hosting a conference on BBNJ, biodiversity beyond national jurisdiction. So how do you address ocean governance beyond national jurisdiction? There's lots of different tools, legal and otherwise, to bring people together around environmental issues and oceans. It's an opportunity that we're at long last talking about oceans from an environmental perspective. We haven't been doing that enough. Focus on environmental issues has been land-based rather than ocean-based. With that comes opportunities, I think, for countries like the Philippines, especially because it's an archipelago, to think about environmental governance, but also, of course, IUUF and how do you protect fisheries. And with that comes opportunities to partner with countries across the world that are facing similar challenges of overfishing and that have very similar challenges with some of the same actors as well. So it's actually very positive that the Philippines is engaged in those conversations, and I would encourage it to continue to do so.
Thank you, Ambassador. Thank you to our panelists. It makes me remember what just to counter what a former president turned ordinary citizen said, that the South China Sea or West Philippine issue is just about water. It's not just about water. You're talking about an area that is the hub of global marine biodiversity. And I think given that this lies in our exclusive economic zone, I think the world is telling us that it is also about custodianship. It's about our ability to protect this so that future generations of not just Filipinos, but people around the world could benefit. So I ask you, if you don't fight for our what is at stake, then what do we leave as a generation to future Filipinos, to future Australians, to future UK citizens if we neglect our ability to take care of our marine environment? With that, we end our moderated discussion, but we now open the floor for questions for our audience here as well as our audience joining us online. For our participants in the venue who wish to ask a question, please proceed to the one holding the microphone, to her. Introduce yourself, your affiliation, keep your questions crisp and short. For those who are joining us online, please direct your questions via the chat box, and we will ask them for you. I think what we can do is we can gather a few and then field them to our panelists. So Mike's not.
All right, thank you. First of all, good morning. I'm Vince Andre Isabelion, Defense Research Officer from the National Defense College of the Philippines. And we really enjoyed the discussion and the moderated discussion provided by this venue and with our panelists today. So my question goes as, I'll just read it from my phone. It seems that China's wolf warrior diplomacy has shifted, as we've seen during Australia's Prime Minister Anthony Albanese's visit to Beijing with President Xi Jinping like about a week ago. So under this context, what are the prospects for Australia's or even the UK being part of AUKUS have in mind in terms of the Indo-Pacific's Indo-Pacific region's maritime security? So does this visit signal any shift in diplomatic tone in to the region, or perhaps does this signal any opportunities or threats perhaps to the region? So that's my question. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. We can entertain two more for our first round. Maybe her, yeah, and then you, sir.
Good morning. I am Ms. Chag Yongkar from the National Police College, and we are in the serious business of producing, nurturing, patriotic, and caring leaders. So my question is, it's just a very simple question. Having heard all of the discussion, what lesson on leadership can our students learn from this West Philippine Sea dispute? And the second question is, having 28% population of the country are Filipino youth, like the ones that fill this place. How can the youth contribute, or what can the youth do in this ongoing battle? Thank you very much.
Thank you. Our third question.
Good morning. I'm Jame Gadula from UANP Law. Your Excellencies, good morning. General Bautista, Jay, good morning. Two questions. You have been talking about strategy, consistency of position, and upholding the rule of law. And I'm addressing this question, the first question, to General Bautista and to Jay. What exactly is our position in terms of objective? Do we simply deter, or do we go back to a status wherein we recover certain islands to their original position, like say 2010 or 2013? Or do we simply accept the status quo as it is now and merely be happy at stopping China from further doing its thing? The second question is directed to General Bautista and Jay Batongbacal for the national perspective, and then to Ambassador Yu and Ambassador Beaufils from the international perspective. And I'm actually a little bit hesitant to ask this question, considering the fact that in every war we have, our armed force is usually consisting of around people from the 18 to 23 year of age, which is coincidentally the people that we have now in this auditorium. Is there a red line that we need to impose, that if that happens, we simply have to essentially assert more than a mere deterrence and essentially go to war with China? Thank you.
So we'll do that for our first round, and while others are also thinking about their questions, and while we're gathering questions online, there's a question about the recent visit of the Australian Prime Minister Albanese. Perhaps, Ambassador, you can.
Thank you so much for that question. Australian government's position has not changed. And talking about consistency, one of the attributes of being a middle power, we are very true to our values. And we have, even throughout the period where, frankly, the relationship between China and Australia was tough, we had always reached out to China for dialogue, because we believe that even when countries do not agree, dialogue is really important. So as my Prime Minister and Foreign Minister have said, when it comes to China, we will agree where we can. We will disagree where we must, and always engage with China in Australia's interests. And that's what Prime Minister Albanese has achieved. And I think this is a really, really good story and experience for the Philippines to respond to and to reflect on, I should say, because Australia, when we were subject to economic coercion, we stood our ground. Can I just say to this group, some of that tension started when Australia actually supported the 2016 Arbitral Award. Can I just say that with this audience? I was there personally when our then Prime Minister publicly talked about the importance of adhering to international law, and that 2016 Arbitral Award was final and binding on all parties. And despite the economic coercion that we faced, we were true to our values. We worked to some extent, shelter and buffer our economy. And I would love to talk about that at some stage, but today is probably not the right forum. And through that, it has led to what we call a stabilized bilateral relationship, which benefits both our countries, China and Australia. And I would like to also point out, and the region at large. As for our commitment to AUKUS, I talked about the importance of diplomacy and deterrence going hand in hand. This is why Australia is investing into our military capability. We are making huge investment into this space because we want to be even a more valued contributor to our collective security of our region. So I hope that answers your question very clearly. Absolutely no change. Absolutely committed to ASEAN centrality and to our strategic partnership with the Philippines.
Ambassador Laure?
Thank you. You want me to answer just the first question? Okay, fantastic. So my answer is not too dissimilar from that of Ambassador HK. Our then Foreign Secretary made a speech setting out our approach to China just a few months ago, and he was able to walk the talk, if you like, when he went to China late August, the day after he came to the Philippines, in fact. And the strategy is threefold. First, we protect our national interest and we protect our values. So that involves protecting our key national infrastructure, our democracies, protecting our values like human rights. And we do so with absolute confidence, unashamedly, unapologetically, because that is the right thing to do. Second pillar is invest in partnerships and alliances, work with partners such as the Philippines to promote our shared interest and our shared views of the rules-based international system, of international law, etc. And third, of course, work with China. We cannot solve the world's problems, whether they be climate change, biodiversity, pandemic preparedness, AI, or otherwise, without China at the table. So that dialogue remains really, really important, which is why visits to China, visits from China are important, and why that corridor, why diplomacy, we say diplomacy is a contact sport where you have to actually engage in conversation I think that remains very, very important. So that's our approach, which is also unchanged. I think it'd be a really broader, interesting conversation amongst ourselves to know whether that, what you call the wolf warrior diplomacy, whether that has really shifted. But that's for a different debate altogether.
I've been getting a lot of questions. I've been looking on my phone to organize them. It's not easy moderating a hybrid seminar. General Bautista, there's a question about the Filipino youth, right? The Philippines is a young population, right? And while most of our leaders are not young, a lot of the voters, a lot of our citizens are young. And sometimes the Gen Z, the millennials feel that they're not represented. They don't know what their role is. So how can they be tapped and maybe mobilized? There's a question about red lines and war, right? Of course, no one likes that, but part of strategic planning is to conceive every possible scenario. So based on your extensive experience, sir, please.
Thank you. Thank you for that question. In fact, I mentioned that earlier. Our concept is the whole of nation approach. And as I said, that includes all of us here, including students. All sectors of society has a role to play. For government, including local government, to simply govern. For the educational institutions to inform our people. The rest of others, including the youth, to simply speak out about our rights, about our narrative, which is anchored, regarding the West Philippine Sea, is anchored on UNCLOS and the arbitral award. And we simply have to assert that, assert our rights, speak out. Tell the rest of the nation, if we all speak that language, it is in effect social pressure, so that even those deviants advising other narratives will abide by the national consensus if we demonstrate and we speak out and assert that. So all of us has a role to play. Students, speak out. Assert the Philippine narrative, and that is anchored on UNCLOS and the arbitral award. We need a cohesive people to be able to stand up to a bigger adversary. That's the only way we can stand up. Secondly, on strategy, what is our intent? Our intent is really to assert our sovereignty and sovereign rights, but at the same time, avoid conflict in doing that. It's a tricky balancing act, and that is where strategy and brinkmanship come in. That's a tough act to play of balancing between the two. But our intent is to assert our sovereignty and sovereign rights, at the same time avoiding conflict and maintaining cordial relations with everybody. That's what we are. And what is the red line? You know, our Constitution says that we renounce war as an instrument of national policy, and we continue to abide by that constitutional provision. But having said that, deterrence is about preventing any aggression against us, deterring. And many ways, there are many ways to do that. And there are requisites to be able to achieve a credible deterrence. But note that if deterrence fails, we should be able to fight back and assert our rights, our sovereignty. If there is aggression, that means deterrence has failed. And we need to stand up and defend our sovereignty and sovereign rights. So That is my view on those issues, and I welcome any follow-up questions.
Right. Jay, there's a question about recovery of certain maybe features, or do we just accept the status quo? What do you think should be in national policy regarding this in the South China Sea?
No, I think, yeah, this is related to that. I think that based on what the government has been doing, the policy generally is to prevent any further changes in the status quo, because and that's why we're defending our right to be able to resupply the Sierra Madre. We do not want another change in the status quo spurred by China. Okay, and but over the longer term, I think that we would at minimum, what we need or what we've been trying to achieve is a return to what I call a nominal status quo ante, and this means to be able to do what we had been always doing before, no? Which is to fish, to have our fishermen fish peacefully within the EEZ without interference, without the intimidation being done by the other side, to be able to explore and exploit our own natural resources within our own EEZ and continental shelf, which we had been doing before. Most people are not aware that we have been exploring for oil on Reed Bank, for example, since the early 70s. In fact, it was one of the first areas we opened up for exploration when the Philippines embarked on offshore oil exploration in the early 70s. No? And we had been doing that continuously until around 2010, 2011. And finally, 2012, we stopped that. There was a moratorium because we wanted the arbitration to be finished first. And then we wanted it to resume afterwards. But now China continues to interfere with us. Our fishermen had been peacefully fishing on Scarborough Shoal and in the Calana Island Group for many, many generations now, no, for years. But now they're being actively prevented from even just sheltering on these reefs, not even fishing, no? And that is changing, that is inflicting massive economic damage for our coastal communities. We would at least, I think, want that to be restored, no? And that's more or less what generally the policies have been looking for. The much longer term, of course, we want a peaceful resolution of these disputes. And part of that is deterring these adventurous initiatives of China to impose itself, to coerce a solution, to use the threat of force as the way to resolve the dispute in its favor. That's what that we do not want, and that's why we're moving in this way to try to shore up the situation in a way that leads to a peaceful rather than a coerced or enforced solution to these disputes. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. For this round, may I ask, may I field some questions from our participants joining us online? We know that countries like the Philippines have filed diplomatic protests, right? I don't know what the number already is, but when do these diplomatic protests and other international remedies fail, right? What could be done to keep the South China Sea, the West Philippine Sea, peaceful and stable? There's also a what if question. What if China imposes a naval blockade, right? For example, with the Rore resupply missions, what would be the response of not only the Philippines but other countries as well? And let me tie a related question. Does this policy of the current government, is it already sufficient? Yeah. What else needs to be done in order for the rightful claim of countries towards their own sovereignty and sovereign rights be upheld? So it's more, what if things get worse? there's been analysis that the likelihood of that increases by the day. What if we just don't get water cannon? What should be the steps apart from filing diplomatic protest and sounding off the illegality, or at least that this doesn't respect international law and the rules-based? Maybe from our dear pastor first. Yeah.
There's a lot of questions in there, Aries, so I'll just touch on a few things. So first of all, diplomatic protests are really important. What does it mean when they fail? I mean, they're not necessarily intended to change actions, but they're important to register because you're registering your position from an international law perspective. I don't think that, them not leading to changes in behavior is them failing. They are one important tool in the diplomatic toolbox. And as we've said before, with deterrence has to come some diplomatic engagement. So I think that's an important first step. What else needs to be done? I think we've discussed it. My personal view is that the strategy, the considered, thoughtful strategy of the government of the Philippines is exactly the right one. I know that there's more and more thought given to economic security, which I think is important and complements what we've been talking about. So that's diversifying supply chains, diversifying trade, ensuring that your economy is robust and supported by lots of partners. I think that's also part of the same conversation. What happens in case of a blockade? That's probably for my two Filipino colleagues to comment on. But I would say also this comes back to working with partners and partners in ASEAN as well, because should there be that kind of event, I think we would hope that a great number of partners, including partners of China, speak out around such egregious acts.
Perhaps if I could very quickly add to Laure's comments, because I agree with everything she said. And one thing I wanted to highlight is that economic power equals strategic power. So what the Philippines need to do is continue to grow and continue to achieve better distribution of income. So you have all your citizens actually lifting in terms of their living standards, and this country becoming more powerful with greater economic growth. And to this extent, this is why Australian government has recently launched our Southeast Asia economic strategy to 2040. And the Philippines profile very highly in that strategy. And the Australian government is planning on engaging with you more, and for the governments to facilitate greater investment and trade between our countries. And certainly the Australian government is paying a lot of attention to help you with the great economic reform agenda that is currently underway.
Thank you. First, diplomatic protest. Yes, there is value in diplomatic protest. In fact, we found that valuable during our presentation of our case in The Hague, standing up to, asserting what is in the law, in UNCLOS, and we need to demonstrate that we are not conceding anything. That's among other legal actions that we can do to pursue our case legally. But diplomatically, there are other ways. There are other things that we need to do. Strengthening our relations with their international community so that we can leverage upon this to bear upon China's adherence to the rule of law, at the very least, and the arbitral award. Politically, we need to develop a national consensus because, after all, as I said, ours is a whole of nation approach, and we need national consensus to be able to do that. Information, advancing the Philippine narrative, economic, growing the economy so that we are impervious to any economic bullying, and even developing economic resilience, protecting our strategic assets, our strategic industries, militarily achieving credible deterrence. And there are many ways of doing that, not just by upgrading our capability, but many more. So we need to do all of this so that they complement each other and we are able to assert our sovereignty and sovereign rights in the West Philippine Sea. Now, regarding naval blockade, technically, naval blockade is an act of war, but I don't think we're there yet. And naval blockade, there is harassment in our resupply operations. But regardless of them blocking us, what we need to do is really assert our rights. We need to resupply our people there. It is our right to do that. And we need to continue doing that, notwithstanding a water cannon or even blocking or ramming incident and harassment of our people. We need to do that, assert our rights. Fishermen must continue to fish in the West Philippine Sea, assert our rights to fish in the West Philippine Sea, for the business community to continue investing in the blue economy and exploiting our resources, exploring for resources. Many things we can do collectively as a people, and that's what the whole of nation approach is all about.
Yeah, well, a lot has already been said, and then there's not much I can add except that to underscore perhaps the issue of or the concept of diplomatic protest. Many people seem to have a misunderstanding about it. No, diplomatic protests are, as the ambassador mentioned, it's only one of the different tools that are available to a country. And the thing is, when you talk about instigating a substantial or real actual change on the ground, diplomatic protest is only one of those tools that use. It is used in conjunction with other tools always. Okay, so do not expect things to happen just because there is a protest. Expect things to happen because a protest was made and it is followed up or accompanied by other actions. So, when it comes to the issue of blockade, blockade is a technical term, and that's why even I also expressed reservations about using the term blockade. But as General Bautista mentioned, if China imposes a blockade, declares a blockade, it's just declaring an act of war essentially. Okay, and we're not there yet. What it has been constraining our ability to resupply the Sierra Madre. And as I also mentioned earlier, if we let that happen, I've said this in other forums, if we let that happen, they will do it again in other places. And that's why we cannot allow it to happen. If they try to constrain us, we need to break through. And it's the simple fact. That's a simple fact, no? And I think that despite everything, the government, especially within the armed forces, certainly would have already been discussing this scenario. And it would be, I think, what do you call this? It would be against propriety. It would not be appropriate to discuss this openly, but let's just be clear that if there is an attempt to prevent us from resupplying, we have no choice. We have to we have to break through that attempt. We have to keep resupplying the area, or else worse consequences will follow. Yeah.
Thank you. I know that there are other questions, but I deeply apologize that we have ran out of time. I just want to thank all our panelists for wonderfully sharing their insights and perspectives. I thank you, the audience, for their patience, but maybe as someone who is in the thick of this, but only from an academic point of view, but I do wish that we all express our appreciation to our brave Filipinos who every month or twice a month go to a Ayungin show, risk their lives, knowing what the risks are and the cost of doing so, asserting our sovereignty and sovereign rights, helping our fellow Filipino soldiers or members of the security sector stationed there, to the brave journalists who cover these RORE missions. I think let's not malign them on social media, but on the contrary, you talk about, for me, heroes. You have every Filipino a hero every time he or she or they help assert what is rightfully ours by international law. The applause should be with these brave Filipinos and Filipinas as well. To officially end our program, may we call the German Deputy Head of Mission, Mathias Kruse, to deliver our closing remarks. Sir?
Thank you. Thank you. Excellencies, General Dr. J, distinguished guests, dear friends, if I may. What a wonderful discussion. Thank you so much. I was so delighted to see that, to be part of that in a way. And first of all, a brief word of thank you for the warm welcome in the Philippines that I've experienced in so many ways. It's great. And also for the very warm welcome here in José Rizal University. This is actually, may I say that, my first visit to an academic institution in the Philippines after I, is it on? Now it is on. Okay, thank you. So, so I really feel honored and actually excited about my visit here. Thank you so much. I'm grateful to this university also for hosting this wonderful event this morning and for sparing no effort to make it a success. A big thank you also to the organizers, of course, of this conference. You've done a great job, actually, to put together this forum. Thank you so much. And let me add that actually just the amazing audience that you brought together actually speaks for itself. So thank you all for being here. Also to those who attended this morning. Of course, it is my honor and my privilege to thank our fantastic panelists of this conference and thank them for their most valuable contribution to what I think was actually an enormously fruitful and animated debate. Thank you for that. A quick word also on the Friedrich Ebert Foundation, who is one of the organizers, if I may. Allow me to commend them for their fantastic work, for their engagement in the Philippines. They've been active here, not only in the Philippines, but in the whole region for many years now. Thank you for that. So, dear friends, when I arrived just a few weeks ago here, I was confronting with what was called what we call today, it's no longer there, but the title of the conference, the Evolving Security Dynamics in the South China Sea, framed a bit diplomatically of a serious conflict there. That seemed to be the talk of the day, and in that sense, obviously, our today's forum couldn't be more timely. The speakers this morning have offered a whole wealth of valuable thoughts and reasonings, and we deeply thank you for this. But you may ask yourself, now, what do we take away from that discussion? And allow me just to make a few remarks on that. First, obviously, and you all know that very well, we are confronted with a complex geostrategic situation here that is complemented by constant acts of disinformation. It has been rightfully said during our discussions. And so therefore, and I'm taking up something that has been mentioned in the discussion and also by our keynote speaker, Secretary knowledge and understanding. And I think this is what is very important here. I can only echo what has been said before. This is a crucial advice also to our audience, and I'd like to associate myself with this what I think is good advice. Second, and that seems to be another key message of our discussions that we have been following. The Philippines is not alone in their situation, and they have strong partners and allies. Some of them have been present here today on this podium. So that is true for the UK, Australia, us, Germany, and many others, if I may say so, who have repeatedly voiced support and rejected harassment of great powers. So, and I think it's safe to say we will continue to do so, and we stand by the Philippines in this conflict. From there, my dear friends, there comes a third point, also a conclusion we can draw from the discussion that we've followed. Very clearly, it has been said, don't accept harassment. Don't let yourself be intimidated. In short, don't give in to aggression. And to sum that up, maybe all that merges into an appeal to you, again, to you, my dear friends who have listened carefully here. An appeal to you as the young generation, as the future leaders of the Philippines, because I think it has become clear. This is a serious issue. This is about the territorial integrity and the sovereignty of your country. So do take it seriously. And I like to end with a word. I think it was you, Ambassador HK, who brought this up. Try to be, not to give in, and at the same time, develop a positive agenda. And I think this is very important. I think this is excellent advice. So again, thank you for being with us this morning. Thanks to the panelists who did a wonderful job. I enjoyed it very much. And to the organizers. And I'd like to say, see you next time. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Sir? Thank you, Mr. Kruse. Again, we would like to express our heartfelt appreciation to our speakers, to those who are here, to those who are joining us online. We thank José Rizal University for graciously hosting us in your beautiful campus. This is the final installment of our European Foreign and Security Policy in the Indo-Pacific series. We hope to see you all in our future events. If you have questions or concerns, you can reach us via our official Facebook, LinkedIn, and Twitter accounts. As we end, may we also ask for a few minutes of your time to please answer the post-event survey. For our in-person participants, the QR code is found on the registration table. It's also here. For our online participants, the QR code is flashed on your screens and found in the chat box. Those who require a certificate of attendance, please be informed that you need to accomplish the evaluation survey to receive the certificate. We would also like to invite you to answer a survey on pressing national security issues spearheaded by the Amador Research Services. This is the QR code as well as the Google form link. This survey will heavily inform us about the thoughts of the Filipino security community on pressing national issues. Once again, this is Dr. Aries Arugay. Marami pong salamat, and see you all in our future events.